Why can't the Nintendo Switch run these games? Well, it can, but not well. Truthfully, most Switch games run with no issues, but those that do struggle just so happen to be some of the biggest names on the console. As a PC gamer, I looked up the specs for the Switch and I was truly surprised to see how bad they were. Let's be fair to Nintendo though, they were always behind the times in terms of power. The Wii U, Wii, and DS consoles were truly nothing special. Nintendo's specialty has always been making streamlined games that are smooth and enjoyable to play. Here's the problem though. They couldn't even do that with some of these Switch games. Let me be clear, I understand that both a console's hardware and a game's software must be optimized and compatible for a smooth experience. So for many games that don't run that great, we can't blame Nintendo directly for it. What we can blame Nintendo for is not giving developers a better platform to develop games for. There's a lot more here than just random criticism though, so let's take a look at the history of how Nintendo's hardware has held up over the years. If we go back to the days of Super Mario Galaxy, I don't remember ever experiencing lag, frame drops, or ugly textures. The reason for this must be because of how much attention that Nintendo gives their mainline games. The Wii wasn't necessarily a powerful console by any means. It could run certain games at 60 FPS sure, but its resolution was also 480p. This is a similar situation to their handheld consoles where the games usually ran great, but the resolution was so low anyway. In a bubble, it's hard to see how much all these numbers matter though, so let's compare this older generation with what other consoles were around at the time. The PS3 and Xbox 360 both released around the same year as the Wii, and were both capable of running 1080p 60 FPS. Certainly not on the level of consistency as modern consoles, but the support was there. At the time though, this was absolutely fine. The Wii was a console that didn't pretend to be anything more than it was. The controller was silly looking and the games were even sillier. Regardless, the market that Nintendo was playing at was completely different than the hardcore graphics gamers. So if we fast forward to the modern day, wouldn't the same be true? Well, yes, technically. Most of the Switch's releases don't have a problem running. Mario Kart, Mario Odyssey, Mario Wonder, these games all run great. But if you haven't noticed, these are all Mario games, Nintendo's most cared for series. The people overseeing the development of the console are the same people overseeing the development of these games. And it's not like these games are visually bad either. Those 3 titles I listed earlier are some of the best looking games on the console. The Switch's software clearly has the capability of great visuals mixed with a solid gameplay experience. So what's wrong with titles like Tears of the Kingdom and Pokémon Scarlet and Violet that they cannot be run properly on their own console? When developing a game, you need to keep the consoles you're developing for in mind. A PC game can't just be ported to a home console with no consideration of specs or optimization. Even so, some games are just not meant for certain situations. In particular, the Switch handles open world games like absolute trash. Specifically, I'm talking about complete open world environments, not like a Mario Odyssey where it's more of several big levels. I'm talking about games like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. Being first party Nintendo exclusives, you would think that we would be getting the same great quality that Mario games get. And for the most part, that's true. But I can't forget the first time that I experienced frame drops in a Nintendo game when I played Breath of the Wild. The fact that on release, one of the flagship games for the Switch already couldn't be run properly kind of annoyed me. I mean, I was a kid at the time, but considering how smooth Mario Odyssey was, I was just kinda surprised to see that Zelda didn't get the same treatment. It really wasn't that bad looking back though. Sure, there were some annoying areas that really dropped the frames, but it was mostly fine. The same goes for Tears of the Kingdom, which is slightly more optimized, but also just has some strange graphical issues, which I first noticed when I looked at these flags. None of these issues or visual glitches ever affected my gameplay experience though, which is fine in my book, but now that we've seen that Nintendo is willing to leave in a certain level of unpolishedness if it doesn't affect gameplay too much, we should talk about Pokemon. So a lot of people don't actually know this, but the Pokemon company is owned by 3 separate organizations: Nintendo, Game Freak, and Creatures Inc. This means that we cannot exclusively blame either Game Freak or Nintendo for sloppy releases. That being said, I've been emulating Pokémon Scarlet on my new PC and it's actually super fun. It does seem to be a bit laggy at times, but overall my computer handles the game well. Considering I'm also able to upscale the game's resolution, this game is clearly best played on a good PC. This is so interesting to me because I don't understand how the Pokemon company looked at how Pokemon Scarlet ran on the Switch and was like, okay, this is ready for release. They clearly knew what they were doing though, because these Pokemon games keep setting sales records every year, even if the community response keeps getting worse and worse. This lack of punishment for their sloppiness only fuels their desire to cut corners with crucial parts of the game. You know, like actually being able to play it. It really sucks too, because this game has been so much fun for me, but I can tell that it would absolutely suck to play on Switch. The landscapes look ugly, the environmental details are either low res or non-existent, and the frame rate is garbage. If we remove all that though, the character designs are unique and actually quite detailed, the storyline is interesting, and the gameplay is fun. So for anyone willing to emulate and is able to get a copy of this game on your PC, definitely go for it. Because as great as it would be for Nintendo to offer their games on computers, we all know that will never happen. On the other hand, other consoles games coming to Switch has become more and more common. With these, you can usually expect when a game won't be ported well. In general, any open world game will become extremely sluggish and ugly to look at. The recent port of Hogwarts Legacy is proof of this. Honestly, this game already wasn't that visually impressive to me, especially coming off of playing Elden Ring, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Tears of the Kingdom. I haven't actually gone and bought the game for the Switch, and I'm glad because wow, this game looks like a complete waste of time to sit through. I'm not saying that because of the gameplay or the story, but just because of the amount of loading and frame drops. Unless you have no other consoles or computer, this game is kind of a terrible idea to play on Switch. At least, it is playable though, unlike the next game I'm going to talk about, WWE 2K18. For anyone familiar with sports games, you already know that it's the same game every year. But wow, the fact that 2K released the game and it caused the death of their franchise on the Switch is hilarious. I don't know why, but for some reason they're able to get NBA 2K working, but not WWE. As someone who actively watches wrestling but doesn't play the games anymore, it does kind of make me sad knowing that there's probably some kid out there that asked their parents for the latest WWE game on Switch, and they paid full price for this. I remember playing WWE 2K14 as a kid on the Xbox 360, and it ran like 10 times better than 2K18 did on release. Enough of this negativity though, because there are plenty of good ports out there. Ironically, the best ports usually come from non-AAA developers. At best, we usually get average ports from companies like Nintendo. For example, we all remember that 3D All-Stars was okay, but nothing amazing. Certainly nothing impressive from a company with a budget as big as Nintendo's. On the other hand, if we look at the Switch port of Persona 5 Royal, Atlus clearly wanted their game to sell. There really is nothing bad I can say about this game, and this is coming from someone who played it originally on the PS5 and again on Steam with max graphical settings. Throughout all versions, this game looks and sounds amazing. On Switch, there are little to no instances of frame dropping, even if you intentionally tried to make them drop. Now that we understand a bit about both the hardware and the software side of things, whose fault is it really when games struggle to run on the Switch? Naturally, both Nintendo and the developers would be at fault. The thing is, the Switch has been out for years now. I understand that certain games take years to make, and perhaps they weren't able to adapt to the low power of the Switch in time. This I understand. What I don't get is when we get first-party Nintendo games that can't even run properly like Pokémon Scarlet. A common excuse people give Nintendo is the whole gameplay over graphics argument, and to be honest, this is completely subjective. Some people do not have a care in the world about how a game looks if the game is fun, and others believe the exact opposite. But there is another excuse that people make that is slowly becoming more and more baseless over the years, that being portability. For those familiar with my video on emulation, you'll know my stance on this, but I firmly believe that emulation is the best way to play games in most cases. Furthermore, and without using any terms that people really wanted me to say in the emulation video, I believe modifying certain consoles is also the best way to play many games. Recently, we've seen the release of the Steam Deck OLED into the market, dropping the price of the original Steam Deck. Now, you can pick up a used deck for much cheaper than the Switch, allowing you to play your Steam games portably. Now you may be wondering, what does this have to do with Switch games? Well, if you're willing to do some forbidden techniques, you're able to play every Switch game portably on better hardware and for cheaper. Of course though, this is only an option for those willing to do some extra work for their games. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to play games on their original hardware though. I just think that perhaps you should consider that many developers don't care whether or not their games can be played in the most ideal way. They just want you to buy them. If you do want a balance of playing games on their original platform and better performance, there are options available, just not very convenient ones. Technically, you're able to overclock your Switch, enabling it to run games at the level that it was supposed to. The problem with this this is that you might mess up your Switch firmware in the process, so that's why I advocate the Steam Deck emulation method for portability purposes. No matter the way you play your games, I'm sure you at least wish first-party games on the Switch could actually run properly. There's no reason that a great game like Pokémon Scarlet should be held back by the laziness and willing ignorance of Game Freak. Hopefully in the future we will see improvements with this issue with the release of a new Nintendo console, but until then, maybe you should test the waters with emulation, you just might like it.